Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 159 today. And I am here with my guest, llja. He's from movetorussia.com. How are you doing today, llja?
Thank you, Welsh, for having me. Excellent.
So llja, how's your day been? What have you been up to? Anything much?
Well, I mean, the usual. It's Friday, but we are working kind of almost around the clock with this new shared values visa that's been introduced. There's lots of interest with requests coming in from all over the world. So we're working even on the weekends.
Wow, that sounds absolutely fantastic. Like you're getting all that information, getting all those details of people wanting to move there. Before we start asking the serious questions, how's the weather there going at the moment in Russia, in Moscow? Because it's, close to winter there. How's it going over there at the moment, the weather and stuff?
Well, I think it's still not too bad in that sense, but it's getting a bit breezy. If you want to have the best time to really visit Moscow to check it out, it's probably spring or summer or early autumn. But I mean, winter is coming, and if you're a fan of the snow, it's going to be, of course, a great winter. The ice skating, oh my God, yeah.
I can imagine it's amazing over there, man, and especially the ice hockey, how that's pretty popular in Russia. A lot of Americans seem to forget that ice hockey is pretty popular. It's pretty popular in Russia. Here in New Zealand at the moment, it's kind of up and down. We're kind of entering to spring. We're in spring. The weather's been up and down, but it's getting better now. We're going to be coming into our summer soon. So yeah, sounds good. So speaking of that, llja, tell us about your organization, Move to Russia. Tell us about it. How long has that organization been there for, the website? And are you the chairman? So tell us about the information about it, the facts, and how long it's been going for.
Oh, sure.
Yes.
So we are primarily focused on helping actually people to move to Russia, right? It's in the name. And our essential primary focus was actually high net worth individuals, because Russia was introduced the Russian golden visa. So you can move to Russia if you invest in real estate or company. And that was introduced in January 2023, so quite recently. And there was actually quite a bit of interest for that, especially from the high net worth individuals in the West, because people are a bit unsure what will go on, especially in the US. People are afraid of some sort of larger conflict that might go on from the political side all the way to maybe kinetic, and they want to make sure that their families are safe. Plus, a lot of our customers actually don't like the whole, I would say, rainbow propaganda, right? So it doesn't matter how much money you make if you live in California, your child must still be subject to the rainbow propaganda in school, and you can't do anything about it, right? So that's why Elon Musk moved their headquarters to Texas. So there is stuff that in the West that people don't like, and what they see in Russia is it's safe, it's traditional, the energy is cheap, and the food is without the genetic modifications. So there's lots of upside. So once they visit and actually see it for themselves, they say, oh, well, I want to move to Russia with my family and everything, right? Now, what's really interesting that has happened is the new shared values visa, of course, that they introduced just, in August. And we can talk a bit more about that and why it was introduced and what's the goals for it going forward.
Yeah, so tell me facts about Russia. Tell me about your organization, Move to Russia. So you've had many people from around the world, clients from around the world, especially from the West, wanting to move to Russia because of knowing how the global elitists and the globalist agenda is affecting the West, and the Western economy is going downhill, which it is in BRICS. With that, so tell us about a lot of the expat people who have gone to Russia, and what stories have you heard? And tell us how because it says here on your website that Russia is both traditional and tolerant. So tell us, how is Russia a country that is both tolerant, traditional, and how would you say it's a land of plenty? Give us the facts, especially for people who are wanting to move to Russia. Tell us the facts about Russia and all of it. Go ahead.
Of course. I mean, first and foremost, Russia is the number one country in the world from the point of landmass. It's enormous, right? We have places in deep Siberia that is as large as England, that there is not one person living there, right? The whole thing is kind of just the woods and the taiga. Russia has enormous resource wealth. It's about $85 trillion worth, and this is just estimation. That means about $500,000 for every citizen, I mean in dollars. Of course, the Russians are not getting paid like that in money, but they get paid with cheaper public service, very cheap energy, and lots of things that are invested in the family creation, right? So Russia is very, I would say, pro-family country. The reason for it is, of course, that demographics have to work correctly. There is a big demographic crisis across all the world, one can say, right? And Russia is no exception. The difference is that Russia pursues very pro-family policies. So it encourages people to build families. It sponsors the young families, giving them rebates on the mortgages, right? And it gives special, I would say, monetary incentive for each child. And being a father or being a mother is very positively looked upon in Russia. Also from the point of multiculturalism and tolerance, well, Russia has, I think, over 150, 160 different nationalities, if not more, different kind of, I would say, ethnic groups, and of course, different religions. And all of that is working together now for, well, at least 600 years or so. If you think of it back, right? There's a big cultural understanding that there is a beauty in difference, cultural difference. So Russia doesn't try to make everybody kind of be the same, but to accept people with different religion and cultural background under the same law. Of course, law is important, right? So if you break the law as a foreigner, you might get deported. And there's a lot of deportation right now going on with people that are in Russia illegally from the migration point of view, right? Mm-hmm. One thing that also I think it's important to understand is that Russia is experiencing right now an economic boom. And there are some articles about it, even in the Western media, that reluctantly admits that this is what's going on. The reason for it is that Russia, before the whole sanctions began, extracted a lot of its wealth to the West, right? So Western companies owning Russian assets, people extracting money to the West because they didn't want to invest in Russia, right? Now all those funds stay in Russia, and all those funds are getting reinvested. The unemployment rate is less than 2%. And there is, I think, about 4 million people that needed for the job market in the next 5 years or so. I think we're missing about 500,000 people just from the IT professional perspective. So things are really booming. The IT sector is growing at 10% per year from the real perspective, right? And Russia overtook Germany as the 4th largest economy in the world. So it's good growth, lots of infrastructure investment, and people are positive, right? People are hopeful for the future.
They are very positive in that, because a lot of people say that Russia is, the Western media is saying that Russia is a collapsing economy, it's a collapsing country. It's like, what they say is just absolutely ridiculous. What is Russia's national goals for 2030 and 2026, and where do you think Russia's heading? What are the goals for those years?
There is actually the first, I would say, decree that Vladimir Putin signed when he was re-elected was the national goals for Russia all the way to 2030 and 2036. And there is a big focus, of course, on the family and support of the individual. Mostly it's, of course, fixing the demographics. That's always one of the primary goals. Another one is the technological sovereignty. And what that really means is that, well, if you're getting your medical equipment banned from by sanctions for imports, right? If you get your industrial equipment banned, right? If you get your car support or software support turned off, well, you know that you can't rely yourself on Western technologies. You have to make sure that you have independent value chains that can stand against any such hiss of rage that might come out, right? So there is a big investment in technological sovereignty that is going to drive the Russian development forward. What I think will happen is that there's a lot of buzz about the artificial intelligence today, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody is talking about it. One thing that one have to understand is to do AI, you have to have cheap energy because AI demands a lot of computational power. This is why, by the way, Europe and EU has already lost that race because they will not have the money to invest in the energy that is 4 or 5 times more expensive than in USA, right? Well, Russia has one of the cheapest kind of energy bases in the world, plus very well-educated, I would say, engineer workforce, plus a very, I would say, tight job market. So we don't have a lot of people that they can actually do the jobs that need to be done. So therefore, the investments in AI, automatization, and making sure things work as efficiently as possible is massive, and it's going to continue for the next 10, 20, 30 years. Now, Russia is formally pivoting to the east because the growth is in Eurasia. From the point of economic and demographic, there is no growth in Europe or in US. US, of course, can import a lot of people to it while they have the dollar hegemony. But if the dollar hegemony falls and you don't have any funny money to actually pay the people, right? Well, nobody's going to come to US. So the growth is going to be in Eurasia, where you have the younger demographics and where you have people that want to kind of raise their standards of living and are demanding new goods. Now, where are they going to get all those resources? Where are they going to get the energy? Where are they going to get the kind of metals, and where they're going to kind of get potential the technologies as well? Well, the only country that can provide all that for Eurasia is Russia. So if Russia can build good economic trading corridors to Eurasia, going from the north to south and from the kind of west to east, and can provide and help with the security to make sure that the actual Middle East is stable and calm, that there is good relations between China and India, right? That maybe even Afghanistan has a good development, right? Then it's going to be a booming Eurasia century going forward. The next 100 to 200 years in Eurasia is going to be absolutely fantastic if there's going to be a calm Eurasia, of course.
I think that's absolutely true. I think Russia has a big, future out of it. Another thing I want to also talk about is, what is Russia's education like? How are they in education wise? Like, what facts would you mention, like how Russia is a world leader in education and stuff? Like, how are their universities compared to American universities? How is the education system compared? And how cheap would you say their education system is compared to a lot of the West, especially the universities and all that stuff?
Well, I mean, let's take a step back and first think about, now I'm going to generalize, of course, but if you think about the Western education, especially if you think about the US education, it's very much two-tier education, right? So you're going to have the private schools and you're going to have the Ivy League universities that are producing probably very competitive education if you think about university, right? And then you're going to have the public schools, and you're going to have all the rest of the university that are just getting people in debt, right? Student debt, to kind of be already kind of tie them into the system. Russia doesn't have such a distinction. There is a strong focus to make sure that the actual public schools are competitive. And you can get into kind of, I would say, specialized mathematics or physics or art school from anywhere in Russia if you're a talented student. There is also a lot of kind of support for the talented students. And then there is multiple universities as well with strong focus on the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics skills. So the focus on that, I think, is going to be very important going forward. Of course, there's, of course, economics and humanitarian and languages. Russia is very curious about other cultures. That's why I think, especially when people from the West and from anywhere in the world come to Russia, they're surprised that we view people very favorably, Italians, French, English, and Americans, because there's a distinction in their head between the actual people and the culture and what the government does, right? Because there's many people that don't support the government policies that might be hostile to Russia. So Russia is curious about the culture of other countries and would like to understand it, would like to really understand the other part. And that's kind of part of the inquisitive mind that I think a lot of the Russia is a cultural process. And I'm thinking about from the broader point of view, right?
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now,
you know, it's very...
Yeah.
Sorry, you're going to say something?
I'm just thinking that I probably can have you a bit more examples of the actual education push. So I think one city that people want to maybe look up is something called Innopolis, and it's located actually in Tatarstan region. And it's, I would say, a city that is an IT city and IT university that's been built from ground up. That is a special economic zone for IT companies. They have Yandex robot taxis going around the streets. They have IT companies from all across Russia and actually the world relocating there. And great public schools, universities, and, well, young families and not so young families of IT professionals are going there, are living there. So it's kind of like, a city for the future for the IT and scientists, right?
Yeah,
and there are many of those things around Russia that is springing up, and I think they're going to develop just greatly.
Yeah, they will. That city you mentioned, I've heard is very, very beautiful. Especially a lot of the Muslim cities in Russia. Oh, they're really, really stunning. I've always wanted to go to one of them. It's always been, a dream of mine to go to one of them. What would you say is like when you're trying to with Russia's education? Also, talking about that. How would you compare like Russia to America, like in GP wise and all that stuff, comparing like Russia's economy and like statistic like GDP and all that compared to America right now?
It's a good question. I think, well, gross domestic product, right? It's a funny measure because it actually adds up a lot of things that one might not say is very productive. So, well, do you know that casinos are added to the GDP, right?
Yeah. Sorry, what I mean is when comparing Russia to, like, what I'm meaning is homelessness, literacy rate, free education, free healthcare. That's what I meant, comparing those statistics.
Well, homelessness, that's an interesting thing, and literary rate. Well, I think that from the literary rate, I can't really discuss it. I don't have the kind of numbers in one way or another, but I would guess that they are about comparable. And from the point of the homelessness, well, if you ever visited San Francisco, you've been around the kind of the Palo Alto and the Valley, you will see this, or if you visit New York, you see this very strange phenomenon of actually people that are living in the streets, right? And you're thinking about, well, how does it come that one of the richest countries in the world can't really solve those issues, right? The problem with the people that are maybe mentally unstable, right? Or maybe just falling on hard times that don't have the opportunity to kind of fix them up. Well, in Russia, there is no such things in that sense that you don't see people that are homeless in Moscow. You don't see that people that are homeless in many of the kind of larger cities, right? Because there is both kind of, I would say, mental support programs in one sense or another, and also a bigger opportunity maybe to fall back and have a place in some sort of rural area that you can maybe just live off the land, right? You can have your own little garden that you can actually support yourself with. Plus, the economy is kind of really booming, right? We do have really low unemployment. So if you want to work, you can always find work, and you can always kind of be employed and get your food, and you'll have I would say, roof over your head. Also, the level of ownership of apartments and houses and kind of, I would say, dachas is really high in Russia. I don't have the kind of number right now in front of me in my head, but it's over 60-70%. A lot of Russians invest in real estate and own or have a mortgage. So there is a high percentage of actual home ownership in Russia, I would say, than in US. I will have to double check those numbers. It's an interesting statistic. But generally, if you think about affordability and you think about making the future for yourself, Russia is much better from the point of actual development. So you can actually own a home. You can, down the line, buy a house, right? When you go to work or you may travel in public transport, right? You are not in risk of getting mugged or being harassed or hearing people, crazy people screaming profanities at you or around you, right? And especially, I think, from the women point of view, they can go around, let's say, if they travel alone in Moscow at night at 3, 4 a.m. in the morning, kind of going from maybe some sort of girls' night out, they feel safe. I don't know if you can say the same about, I don't know, London and New York right now. You probably would not.
Oh, absolutely not. Those, especially when they needed to call the military a few months ago in New York, that was pretty crazy. Another thing, I also wanted to ask, in
Yeah.
your opinion, how much, like, would you say, like, in your opinion, a lot of Western people say that Russia's a dictatorship, it's an authoritarian country, and all that stuff. In your opinion, how does, like, Russia's political system work? How much, freedom of speech does Russia have compared to America? And, like, are people allowed to criticize Putin without getting arrested?
I think there are people are for sure allowed. Well, I mean, let's take it back. People somehow, especially in the West, like to kind of think about it as a one-man system. It's really not. There is a kind of a big system of checks and balances, and there is always internal competition between different ministries and different kind of nodes of power, right? Always competing interests, right? So there is geopolitical interests that are still pulling Russia towards the West, right? There are geopolitical interests that are pulling Russia towards the East, right? There is a big discussion about the whole Israel situation, right? I mean, let's not even touch about the Middle East, right? And because Russia has engaged and helped Syria for quite a bit and a while, which is, of course, really good. But it's a discussion. It's an ongoing discussion within both the government and discussion with the people that are expert within their fields. And also, of course, people vote. People vote in the regional election and people vote in the national election. I think what's important is that, especially Vladimir Putin, he does represent continuity, right? So the policy doesn't shift too much. I think what also people have to realize is whatever that you think about Vladimir Putin, whoever is coming down the line after him is going to be much more hawkish on the West with the right, I would say, and the West would have earned it with the policy that they have pursued towards Russia for the last 20 years, right? So if you don't like the leadership in Russia right now, likely it's going to be more hawkish towards the West. What's coming down the line? It's not going to be a reset. We don't believe that, and it's not that Russia is going to be adversary towards the West. No, it's the fact that they will not get any special treatment. So everything will be on the market prices, and there will be no kind of, if Europe frees, there will be no help coming unless Europe pays. That's kind of what it's going to be.
That is correct. How in Russia, because the West say, you know, there's no protesting. In Russia, how is one able to protest? And how much like protests are there often in Russia? And how many political parties are there in Russia?
So I say that political parties there, at least we have of course, the United Russia, which is the biggest one. One, it's kind of almost like a uniparty, but also you have different, both the communist and you have more of a liberals in one sense or another. And there are many local as well parties. Usually the discussion was more towards kind of more, I would say, more independent and kind of going on your own versus more liberal and maybe more Western facing. Now, the liberal movement, I would say, in Russia is very much dead. The parrot is dead. And the reason for it is that, well, all the Russian population, they have their eyes open and they see what kind of policies the West are pursuing. And it's kind of like it's I would say it's a hand outstretched with a dagger behind the back, right? So there is no trust. There is no trust generally. Russia is going, I think, pursue more of building up the nation and building up the infrastructure and turning east policy. That's right now what's baked in the cake. And there is no real political party or movement or anything like that that is trying to push for some sort of realignment with the West, right? And from the point of actually, I think, internal domestic policies, well, there is nobody that's saying, well, listen, we want to have more rainbow propaganda, or we don't like the fact that you guys support the families, or we don't like the fact that there's safety on the street and the public transport is getting developed, right, and there are jobs and the economy develops. Things are going in the right direction. There is not a lot kind of to, I would say, criticize. Of course, there is, I think, it's an interesting thing regarding the Ukraine conflict right now. It's almost like, you know, it's a conflict on the fringes, right? You don't really see a lot and hear a lot about it. So Russia is a bit like US that way right now. Remember that when US had those conflicts in the Middle East? Well, it's kind of like, you know, somewhere over there, there's something going on, right? And I think, of course, within the general Russian public, there is a sense that I think it's actually hard to gauge. Because initially, I think when the whole special military operation was actually began, people were very against it because they didn't want to do it. There was a big kind of outcry about it. But after everything that the West have done, all the sanctions, all the different things, right? There is a kind of very much rally around the flag and understanding that, well, we have to ensure that Ukraine stays neutral.
Yep. And what else?
What?
And what else? Sorry, you wondering my connection went off there.
No. I am saying it's more towards it has to stay neutral. That's it. Yeah. I think it's kind of like, and people probably going to throw, I would say, rotten tomatoes at me in the West in one way or another. But you have to think about exactly in the same way that if Mexico were to have a military alliance with China, USA will never allow it in 1,000 years.
So speaking of that, how does one gain, what would you say is the best way for a person in the West to gain Russian citizenship?
Russian citizenship, that takes a bit of longer time. I mean, the fastest is if you're going to get it directly from the president. He has the power to grant it. But I don't think many people actually do get it. I think Steven Seagal got it, and some other people, right? But there is this new opportunity that arose, the shared values visa. That's what we call it. But really what it gives you is a temporary residence permit in Russia for 3 years. Now, before it was really hard to get it because of two factors. One, the total quote for temporary resident permits in Russia for example, 2024 was only 10,595. That's it, 10,000 people. And all those quotes, I would say special places, were vacuumed out in the first 2 months of every year, right? There was like, okay, everybody wants to kind of I want to take that place and make sure that I can have a chance to get the temporary residence permit in Russia. So that was the first hurdle that is now eliminated for people that apply for this shared values visa from a list of special countries. And those special countries is essentially all the countries on the Russian unfriendly countries list, which is, North America, USA, and Canada, right? There's a whole EU. It's actually Japan, Australia, New Zealand, even Micronesia. I will not list everything, but you can look at it on our site as well. And if you are a citizen or you have a permanent residency in one of those countries, you can get a Russian shared values visa without the need to apply for a quota, and also without the need to pass the Russian language, history, and law test, which is actually quite advanced. You have to really study for it, and you have to it takes at least a couple of years to learn in Russian intensely to be able to pass it. Now you can actually get the temporary residence permit in Russia without the need of both of them. Once you get it, you have the opportunity to stay and live in Russia with your family, work there, and arrange your life and kind of try it out. And after 2.5, 3 years, you can apply for the permanent residence permit, which gives you a permanent right to live in Russia and kind of gives you the same opportunities and benefits as a Russian citizenship. The only thing that you can't do is vote in a national election and hold certain government positions. After 5 years on the permanent residency, you can apply for citizenship, should you choose to. Right? So the path to citizenship could be at least maybe 8 years long, right? But it's incremental steps, right? And the first step has been taken. I would say the gates have been opened for over 1 billion people that live in all those countries, if one chooses to actually pursue this opportunity.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, you're going to say something else?
I wanted to actually kind of tell people about there is a lot of questions about how to actually engage with this, right? How do you do it? Well, you apply for the shared values visa or kind of visa by traditional values from within Russia. So what you have to do is you have to come to Russia on any kind of visa besides the transit visa. So you can get a tourist visa, you can have a business visa, anything goes really. And then you have to apply within the region you want to actually live in. So if you want to kind of live in the south next to the Black Sea or in Sochi, you have to apply there. If you want to kind of live in Moscow, you have to apply there. If you want to live in St. Petersburg, you have to apply there. If you want to live on the Far East in Vladivostok, you want to apply there. That's the first thing. So people don't have to worry about what kind of visa they get into the country with. They just have to understand, well, get in and then you apply. That's the first thing. The second thing is that as any new kind of process, I don't think a lot of people realize, but any government policy or any government change is a bit like a, I would say, computer program. When you release a new computer program, there's always bugs. There's always stuff that doesn't quite work and only work out or kind of improve when you have a lot of people going through the process and saying, listen, there's a bug there. That button actually should work, but it doesn't, right? Please fix it. It's the same with this program as with any other government program. So people that are doing it right now, they're going to experience probably much more bureaucracy than they had to, right? That's part of the reason why we also support people going through the process, because it's a hassle. Down the line, I hope within the next 2-3 years, or maybe even faster, the process is going to be much more smooth and improved, right? But for now, this is the best possible way for people in the unfriendly countries to move to Russia. Now, for everybody else, we have lots of requests coming from all across the world. Unfortunately, there is either you have to apply for the quota or get a job within Russia, so the actual employer have to invite you to Russia to work and then to live there. Or last but not least, the Russian golden visa. You have to make a substantial investment in real estate or business, and then you can directly get the Russian residence permit.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you.
Yeah.
If I was to like open a business in Russia, like from the West, let's say if I'm a shop owner or coffee shop owner or like real estate owner, what would you say is what is the best business of any business to go to Russia and start with? If you're someone from the West who wants to like invest in Russia, what would you say is the best business to like invest from the West in Russia? And what would you say is the best way for someone to like from the West who wants to move to Russia to start a business? Like, and if you're someone like, let's say, who's from the West and moved to Russia, how does so for instance, how does a foreigner there, how do they speak to the government of starting a business? How does it work there? And not just a foreigner, but how does a Russian citizen, how do they start their own business there? And like, what are like Russia's like relegations compared to like a lot of the West? Like, what are the laws like? Are they stricter or are they more freer than, because America, has their laws of opening businesses and freedom and all that stuff. Like, what does it compare? So go ahead.
Sure. I think one thing that you have to realize is that Russia is actually moving and working to remove all the different bureaucracies and digitalizing everything. One thing that has been amazing that has been done in Russia in the last 20 years is the digitalization and optimization of the government, I would say, functionality and the tax authority. So the current prime minister, that is Mr. Mishustin, he's called the IT prime minister. The reason for it is that before he moved into the role, he was he remade the Russian tax revenue offices, and it took 10 years. But now it's a digitalized, efficient company, or I would say government service, instead of something that was archaic and very much analog from the Soviet Union times. So when thinking about starting up a business and actually interacting with the government and I would say doing the things that need to be done and regulation, Russia is light years ahead from what it was 20 years ago. I would actually argue that from a bureaucracy point of view, Russia is much better than some of the Western countries and potentially even USA, because USA still has all the different state rules, different state regulations. And I mean, that's not for nothing that lawyers are getting paid a lot in US. It's a whole sector. It has to be complicated, right? Russia is much more about streamlining and make sure they kind of unlock the opportunities. By the way, one thing actually to think about from the point of business, why the sanctions not work for Russia? A lot of the reason why is that you have a lot of entrepreneurial people within Russia right now, and there is opportunity to go around and do things. So it's almost like playing whack-a-mole, right? The business class in Russia that are in the 30s and 40s, they were young in the 90s. They were young during the time when the Russia was at its lowest, and there were crises, there were hunger, alcohol, and bandits in the streets. So there's nothing really that you can throw at this business class that they can't really handle, right? So there is kind of like, I would say, entrepreneurial, wild, managed East that is going on. Now, from the point of sector and geographies, we very much recommend to go and think from the point of Far East. So think about Vladivostok and all the way kind of Far East in Russia, because there's enormous amount of money right now, investments being poured into that area of Russia. From the point of infrastructure, from the point of trade, right? From the point of real estate and building up the, I would say, the better cities so people can move there, right? And also another, of course, very interesting sector is everything about the IT. So you can almost, there's lots of, I would say, B2B and even maybe B2C products that have exited Russia, right? And there's multiple right now IT millionaires in Russia that have been made that are just about, well, they take what's been done and they kind of redo it, reverse engineer it, right? And then maybe make it better. It's the same way that I think when US banned Huawei from certain things, right? Within 3-4 years, instead of a customer, you got a competitor. That's what's going to go on with the Russian IT space, right? They are kind of right now learning within their own country. And then, well, I think that the US and European countries are going to have a much bigger competition for the, for example, Indian market going forward, because you're going to have Russian solutions at the same time. And the question is, which solution is going to, for example, Indians trust? Because you're going to have the US provider, you're going to have the Russian provider, and you're going to have the Chinese provider. Which one do you think the Indians are going to trust? Well, probably not the US, because the US always going to have a backdoor. China, well, China and India, where they might be a bit too close to. But Russia, yes, potentially, right? If they don't go for an internal Indian, right? So IT, very much so, but generally around the transportation, logistics, our farming is huge in Russia. And it's very much in demand. So there's, I don't know which sector really is not really, I would say. Well, okay, one sector you don't want to invest in Russia is diversity politics. That's it. Don't do that. That's not going to go.
No, wouldn't be a good idea.
No. But also there's actually even green energy. That's it. There is a lot of technologies from the China. I know probably many people know that China is the leader in green energy production, right? The photovoltaic technologies with the solar panel and lots of other things. So Russia is also using the solar panels, and in the very dry regions, they want to as well produce the energy from there. But I mean, instead of doing it on their own and developing something that is kind of much more expensive, they just, well, China is already been investing in that technologies for decades. That's why, by the way, they're ahead, right? So why don't you use it? Yeah.
When you look at Russia, can you tell me, like, when you look at Russia, one thing that I read a long time ago was back in 2022, I think it was like beginning of 2022, Moscow was rated as the best city in the world by the UN, which is true. It was, but I think it was one of the best, and it is rated. When you compare that, like, what other facts about like Russian cities that have made them like some of the best in the world that you don't hear from the Western media? And how would you compare like a lot of the Russian cities' safety, compare like in facts and all that, statistics, compared to the safety of like the cities in Western Europe and the cities in America? Go ahead.
Sure. Well, I think one interesting thing that kind of struck me not long ago, I think it was one of the main UK paper. Oh, it was the BBC, right? Reported there is a rape reported in London every hour, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, think from the point of rape statistics. Rapes is one of the most underreported crimes out there because a lot of them is not reported, right?
Also,
So
I just also wanted to mention and also mention about the transport and like, how safe that is. Sorry about that. Just wanted to point that out too. Sorry. Keep going. What?
sure, but I mean, if something that like that would ever happen or kind of came up as a statistic in any Russian city, that would be an uproar and there will be kind of a national emergency. Well, that government is going to be sacked, that's for sure, right? And the mayor is going to get sacked, and I mean, the head of police is going to get sacked. And there's going to be, it's unacceptable, completely unacceptable for such a city to function, right? That's probably going to be the number one public thing, and the power in B will going to be criticized a lot, and I mean a lot, right? But somehow this is passed for normal in London. I mean, it make the headline, and it's like go away, right? While in Russia, there is a big focus on the public transport safety and the safety in general. Now, of course, there's a good and bad about it, right? So, for example, Moscow is a very much, I would say, camera-saturated city. So there's, of course, cameras, right? And that actually look after what's going on. And if you park in the wrong way in Moscow, you're going to have your ticket sent to you remotely or by email, right? And they're going to say, listen, here's a picture of your car that has been wrongly parked, right? And here's your fee for that wrong parking. And if you pay within the next week or so, you're going to have a rebate, or you can go to court, right? And then you'll not have any rebate. So people just pay. So there's a bit, of course, of oversight in the society, but you can have one or another, right? It's digitalization and effectivization of information technologies, which is something that Russia goes for. The reason for it is because, well, we have cheap energy, so we can afford to do it. We have resources to invest in it. And also the demographics, we don't have a lot of workforce, right? So we have to kind of make sure that we are as efficient as possible. And we want our people to be safe on the street. Now, why, for example, also, I think another point that needs to be made is that the punishment system is, well, we are not so laxed for the punishment, right? Mm-hmm. And this is kind of more of an anecdote thing, but I would say, and this is generally known in Russia, but if there is somebody that, for example, is a pedophile or a child rapist, right, or anything like that, right? Well, even if that person is convicted, there is extremely high likelihood that the person will never survive his prison sentence. And this is just a fact. The fact is that within the, I would say, Russian criminal, well, there's always a society, right? And there is a society for criminals as well. Well, the Russian criminal society holds very much traditional values, like it or not. And it's looked down upon, and almost, well, it's you'll be an outcast, and, well, you would likely not even survive your prison sentence, right? That's very harsh, but that's the reality of things, right? But also there's both the law and the cultural element to protect the women and the children within society, which is important, right? This is what a traditional kind of society is about. And laws are the institutionalized rules of the society. That's all they are, right? And Russia is about safety, tradition, and very much right now, I think, focus on getting the demographic back up and getting the people with the similar culture to Russia. Both people that have emigrated from Russia long ago and now want to come back, but also people that, well, let's say if Kamala wins, we have a whole list of potential people that hold more of a traditional values in the USA that are right now writing us and say, listen, if Kamala wins, I and my family are going to Russia. That's it.
Yeah. In Russia, and also too, I spoke to someone a long time ago who came on my show, and they said to me Russia doesn't really have a lot of help for disabled people. Well, how does Russia like help its disabled people out? How is the benefit system in Russia like? What do they do for people like who are needing help looking for work, needing help looking for jobs? What is the benefit system like there? And like, what are the social programs there? What are the social programs like for people with disability and people with autism or like ADHD there?
It's a good question, and I can tell that there's still a long way to go in one sense or another, right? Russia is on an upward trajectory, but is everything the right way and perfect? Of course not. So I'm saying that there are programs, but of course there's need to kind of do better down the line, right? And there's some sort of kind of minimal engagement. I think there's lots of different volunteer organization, right? But I think very much disabled person would rely a lot on their family, right? So family kind of support. And this is kind of taking a step back as well. So Russia doesn't have a lot of those, I would say, elderly homes in that sense or another. There is more a tradition that actually the elderly live within the larger family, which is, I think, important. There's a bit the same way with the Italians and so on. Now, we people in the West have come away from that because, well, everybody wants to live their own life and we don't want to kind of take care of our parents, right? And the parents don't want to kind of infringe on the kids. I think in Russian, kind of my personal belief, that's a bit wrong. The reason for it is there's a lot of wisdom from the older generation that can be passed over to the new generation, right? There is always kind of an upside with the interaction between the kind of, I would say, the elderly, the grandfathers and mothers and their grandchildren. And a lot of things maybe that doesn't go quite well in the West is due to the fact that we have broken those families and we are still breaking them, right? Because, well, family, I would say the family as a unit is very much under attack, especially within kind of more of a liberal way of thinking. Now, but coming back to your question regarding the disabilities and disabled people, yeah, there is a lot I think to do, but it's going to be solved in the next 5, 10, 20 years. But right now, well, you're probably going to get much better disability support in Norway or, well, somewhere in Scandinavia, right? Than you're going to get in Russia.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So regarding that, right now, we all know that the BRICS summit is coming up, the BRICS meeting in what
Kazan.
place in that in Russia? In Kazan. So, yes. Which is going to absolutely, BRICS is thriving at the moment. It's economically doing well. It's incredible, the organization. There's going to be about apparently 200,000 directs like heading to, for the BRICS meeting. What is with the current BRICS meeting coming up? Why would you say it's going to be the most important geopolitical summit of this century? What are you hoping that it's going to achieve, and what are you hoping that it's going to achieve, and what do you think is going to happen in that summit?
That's a good question, but I mean, if you think about it, the reality of things, it's all about how the Eurasian continent is going to develop. If you think about how the trade has been done so far, well, if everything is going to dollars, through dollars, right? So any kind of trade transaction between, let's say, China or Russia or India or Russia or Egypt and Russia or any kind of, let's say, India to Egypt, well, things are converted into dollars, and dollars are going to the Merrill Lynch or JP Morgan Bank in New York, right? So things are going all the way over the pond and then coming back to Europe. So everything kind of goes through US. Information goes through US. I would say transactions go through US, right? And kind of the whole marketplace. Well, there is a clear need for that independent marketplace. It doesn't rely on the US dollar. I think that's the biggest question that goes on. And if you think back towards I would say when the US dollar dominance was established, there was the alternative suggestion by, I believe it was Keynes, right? The famous economist that said, well, listen, we need a supranational currency that was called Bancor, only for the trade between the governments to kind of clear the deficits and profits, or clear the trading imbalances. It will not be used on the national level, but only between the countries. And instead of US dollar, there would be kind of a separate independent bancor that everybody would use. That would eliminate the need for somebody actually holding on and having the privilege of having the reserve currency. So nobody will have the endless credit card. Because if you have an endless credit card, you have you will spend it, right? You will spend it on financing things that you want. And you might be buying up technologies, you might be buying up, I would say, people. And by buying up people, I mean that the way that US can attract talent, but paying them top dollars. Well, if you have the endless supply of dollars, you can pay top dollars, right?
Yeah.
Or actually maybe buying up politicians around the world or providing influence, right? Well, I mean, you're probably going to read a lot about it down the line when all the different CIA archives are going to open up. But there is, of course, an element of sponsoring things with money. Now, if there is no hegemony from a US dollar perspective, we might have a much more calmer world. So how do we build an alternative? I think that's going to be the biggest discussion at the BRICS summit. And of course, all the different infrastructure, investment jointly, because besides the kind of common financial infrastructure and solutions, there's a need, of course, for physical infrastructure. Besides the physical infrastructure, it's going to be a need to discuss the security infrastructure. Well, you can't really kind of trade through Afghanistan and things are blowing up and shooting over there, right? But if Afghanistan, for example, is safe and secure, and there are people that can not be hungry there, right, and kind of have a decent job over there, right, and don't make money based on selling drugs, which they did during the U.S. occupation, right? Well, Afghanistan might become actually the crossroad of Eurasia that was always meant to be. Could be a very profitable country down the line, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, let's see. But there's it's a first step in a long road, I would say, and let's hope it's a successful one. Maybe they will not come to some sort of agreement, but it's incremental, right? There is a clear need, a clear understanding that as long as the US have the endless credit card, it's going to cause trouble because it's very safe behind two oceans, and there is kind of no real repercussions for any kind of things that it does in the world, right?
Yeah, especially this banking system, that a lot of people say, the Rothschild banking system that has plagued the world. And one thing I do like about BRICS is it's trying to get the world away from that banking system that has corrupted it. And especially when you look at the Belt and Road Initiative that China's doing, helping all the countries out in Africa, helping, countries like Iraq rebuild after they had World War II. And not to mention, Russia's, done a lot to help Iraq and Syria rebuild after those awful wars. And they're helping countries in Africa too. And it's absolutely fantastic. Can I just say,
Yes,
what was the summit that happened earlier on this year in Russia? Was the international summit, the one that was very big? What was that one again?
Oh, you think about St. Petersburg Economic Forum?
Yes. The alternative to the World Economic Forum. One thing I loved about that that forum was, if you compare it to the WEF forum, which of course is the WEF forum, the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, the Davos one, right? Yeah.
Which is Bilderberg, Babylonian, Khazarian, Zionist, London, the greater city of London controlled, is in this summit in St. Petersburg. They talk about growth. They talk about helping other countries. And there's a brilliant YouTuber who I watch called Sasha Meets Russia. She got censored by YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
There are other people called Ava Barlett and DD Geopolitics, who had some people, I don't know, DD Geopolitics weren't there, but they were talking about it, and other people. And they just mention like how there's a lot of foreigners who talk about how the summit was brilliant and how everyone wants to unite together, and how there's different, people that come to that summit. And as a Westerner, and the difference is with that summit, if you compare it to like the WEF summit, only rich people are allowed to go to the World Economic Forum summit. But the international summit in like St. Petersburg, like you said, that was happening this year, people are allowed to go to that, like different people from around the world. And like watching those videos of hearing how it's going to help the world go forward, it just shows you like how Russian media is much more better, it's much more freer, it's much more independent. Not to mention how like there are people, not to mention the FBI just recently, is planning to go after people, who work for RT News and sanction them. And not to mention, whether it's been Scott Ritter who's been targeted, there was someone from Widmeston Marks who was targeted, Danny Shaw who was targeted. There are a lot of other people who have been targeted by the Western media, who I'm really worried that the more that as we all know, the more the American empire collapses, the more like the Russian media outlet people are going to be targeted. I'm just worried that the FBI is going to go crazy and go after them too. It's just like, especially people who have to work for RT News, and that's because RT News. And one thing these summits show is that they're much better than the Western summits. They're much more free. This is what the West should be doing, but it doesn't happen at the G7. It doesn't happen at the World Economic Forum because they're all controlled. When you look at that, how does that make you feel, with these summits? And what would you say is your favorite thing about going to these summits that you really enjoy the most?
It's a good question. I think in general, the feeling is very much, and this is actually really good, right? So it's kind of the Eurasian continent, and everybody is waking up to the fact that, hey, we can do something really brilliant independently, right? Because you have kind of a period of, I would say, almost 500 years of dominance by the West and the Western thinking. All the way, I would say actually this period started when the Muslims or the Turks conquered the Roman Empire, which is the East Roman Empire, the Byzantine. And then the Europeans had to go find a way to India because the Silk roads were closed or very expensive. Now that spurred the kind of period of innovation for the West with the maritime and discoveries, and that's why the technological industrial revolution. So it was really the pioneer in terms of both technological development and ideas. Now it's the other way around. Now it's like actually the West that is blocking development for the rest of the world, right? And the rest of the world is saying, well, we are not having that. And actually, well, the West is big and it's powerful. That's at least the way people think when they look at it from the outside, right? And we have to work really hard to actually carve our independent paths and not be dependent on it, right? And that's a powerful, I think, message. And we want our people to grow, and they want our families to prosper, and we want the world to be safe. One thing I think everybody has to understand, wherever you live, there is, for example, such thing as hunger, right, in the world, right? Today, in our economic realities, it's an impossibility. We, as human beings, as kind of species, produce enough food to feed everybody out there, right? The only reason somebody somewhere starves is because of the political decisions, right? Because somebody wants to apply pressure on this country and make sure that that population suffers. Now, the question you have to ask yourself, how often is that somebody is decision maker in the West? And that's a horrible thought. But I mean, there is a lot of people of high moral values and traditional, I would say, pro-family, pro-children, and well, they want the best for the human beings in general, right? And one thing that we'll have to understand is that, well, at least let's pursue policies so people don't starve around the world, right? And unfortunately, well, I think in general there is also a sense that the West really lost their moral high ground. Now it's like out in the open. The emperor is naked. Everybody sees it, and well, everybody sees it. And okay, we have to charge a path that is independent, right? We have to provide a better alternatives, a vision for the future, and not anti, right? It's not about being anti something, right? It's about being pro something, for stable growth, for kind of happiness, for as well freedom of being different, right? We don't want the Indians to be like Russians. We don't want the Chinese to be like Russians. The Chinese don't want Russians to be like Chinese, right?
No.
Everybody doesn't have to be. Well, it's if you believe in democracy, the people in the country should decide for themselves whatever to be a liberal democracy or not. Now, even if you believe in the kind of version of Fukuyama, end of the world, right? Everybody will become a liberal democracy sooner or later. Well, two things. One is that if you believe that, you shouldn't rush it, right? Take it, let it take the time it actually needs. The kind of, the drive to install a liberal democracy in Iraq and Afghanistan, it was ludicrous, right?
Yeah.
I mean, well, maybe even if you believe that the end of the game is a liberal democracy, let those people take the time and lead by example. Don't try to force it down the throat with a kind of stick. That doesn't work. That's the first thing. The second thing is that imagine very much so China right now, I would say very much a capitalist country, right? Now, some people would say, even probably right, the argument that John Mearsheimer would do is that he would say that, well, if China was a liberal democracy, there would be a competition between China and USA regardless. So it's not about the structure. It's about the power, really. There is no way right now, I think the USA will be able to tolerate the fact that might be a multipolar world, and we are in a multipolar world right now, right?
Yeah.
And the faster everybody accepts it and start to build up new relations based on that, the safer everybody will be. Because there's lots of nukes in the world, right? And I think there is no time in the world that we have, such as now, for the whole kind of population, for one tiny mistake to really have devastating consequences for the whole human race.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. I saw this very interesting. So I wanted to put this into two questions. Sorry, yeah. 2 questions. So this was the first question. First question is, so I saw this brilliant thing where you said it took 2 world wars for the English Empire to collapse. This is a tweet you said, and in 1929, in the period of that, where, and there's a quote by someone that says, "The old world is dying, the new world struggles to be born." This is Tom Lawrence.
Yeah.
So the first question is, when you mention how it took 2 world wars, you're obviously colluding it to the cinema. Like, what do you mean by that quote in historic facts, and how you were mentioning before the show began to me about the Civil War? How would you say, with, you know, the power of, like, the superior power of the world's fracture, you know, moving to the east with China and Russia potentially becoming the world's superpowers, and the West losing its dominance? And the second question is, I wanted to ask you is, what is your prediction for the United States elections this year? Do you think, you know, Kamala Harris is going to win, knowing that America is a corporation? Of course, it's not been a constitutional republic since 1913 for the Federal Reserve Act, which turned it into a corporation controlled by the Zionist Babylonian elite. Sorry, question number 2 was regarding that. What is your prediction for the elections? Do you think there's going to be a civil war in America, or do you think that Harris is going to win and there's going to be a civil war in America, which of course will lead to potentially civil war because a lot of Trump's supporters won't accept that? Do you think Trump's going to win? And if America collapses, what do you think its collapse is going to be like? Do you think it's going to be like the collapse of Rome, or do you think it's going to be like Russia was in the 90s? Go ahead. Those 2 questions. Sorry for that. It was long.
Well, I think let's hope that, of course, the America doesn't collapse, because, I mean, it's going to be a big problem for anybody, right? Imagine, I mean, it's the same thing like if you know what the biggest thing was when the Soviet Union collapses is tracking all those nuclear warheads, right?
Yeah.
Think about it. I mean, that's going to be a world security issue, not to mention all the different things, right? I think there's no desire for a thinking person in the whole world for the USA to collapse. What I think that is actually in the cake is a managed decline, which is something that is gonna to come regardless of whoever wins, because there's no way to do there is no bunny to kind of pull out of the hat. Let's look at for example, Baltimore bridge, right? That's been collapsed due to this traffic accident with the ship. Now, how fast do you think China will be able to rebuild one of those?
Very quickly.
I think it will be done in a couple of months, right?
Yeah.
Now, Russia doesn't have such industrial capacity, but still, I think within a year or 2, they will be redone. USA, well, I don't know how long they're going to kind of screw around until that's rebuilt. The problem, I think, in general with the USA is that there is a big conflict. Well, they usually talk about, right, the real and the information, I would say, economy. You have the coast elites versus the heartlands, right? Now, the real economy has been on the losing side ever since they abandoned, I think, the gold standard, right? And wanted to kind of let the greed run free in the 1970s. That has been enormously profitable for anybody that has been holding assets, any kind of assets, right? The stock market, if you were in the real estate, if you were any kind of investor, and you were moving your capital to the Asia and kind of making sure that you are utilizing the cheap labor and energy and everything there, and then you were selling it back to the West, made lots of money, while you essentially cannibalized and left all the people that are part of the real economy down in the gutter, right? Mm-hmm. If you looked at the kind of cities like Detroit, right, or even Baltimore, right? I mean, this from a steel production, right? It was hollowed out husks of the former glory. So there is not a lot of industry left, and now I think that what Trump generally represents is the fact that there's kind of real economy that's coming back, and kind of it was almost like it was buried. It was dead, and now it's coming back and said, listen, we really have to kind of get back to it. And in the long run, I think that the real economy will win because, well, you can't feed people or close people or build houses based on the IT and social media, right? You can't eat your Facebook posts or X post or Twitter post, whatever, right? So in the long run, the real economy will win because that's how it's supposed to be. But it will take some time. Might be 10, 20, 30 years, we'll see. And while this is going on, there is gonna, hopefully, USA is gonna go into a period of restructuring, right? Because it has to kind of build up that real economy back up. The living standards in USA and any kind of country that is connecting with the USA will hopefully slowly fall at least 30%. So if you were kind of used to a certain level of standard of living, right?
Yeah.
1/3 less at least. And while Eurasia is going to develop. And hopefully 30, 40 years will emerge with new technologies and better system to kind of re-engage. That's my positive scenario. The worst scenario is, of course, whatever you describe, some sort of civil conflict. And if it's going to be a civil conflict, well, with the... I lived a bit, of course, in USA, and there's lots of hard-working, determined people. I would hate to see any kind of conflict between hard-headed people, right? It's gonna be, well, it's gonna be terrible. There's gonna be lots of people suffering, right? So no, and I think that from, of course, the point of making sure that you are secure in one sense and another, that's why we recommend, well, don't invest in bunkers or stuff like that. It's the stupidest thing. What you should invest in, or what you should think about, you should think about the plan B. And maybe the most bold and obvious plan B is to look at Russia, potentially relocate your family to Russia, because if such a horrible scenario will come down, right, you're better off somewhere safe in Europe, Russia, or whatever, right, to kind of live through those maybe 5-10 years of turbulence. So yeah, I don't know if it was an exact answer. I was not going to predict the elections because nobody can do it.
So in my opinion, I think it doesn't matter who wins. Harris, the thing is, how I look at it is, you got a different point of view. My point of view, it doesn't matter who wins. Harris, Trump, they're all controlled. They're all controlled opposition. America is a controlled country. It's a corporation. It's been that way since 1913, since the Federal Reserve Act. You can argue since the Act of 1871 from the District of Columbia Act, which turned it from a corporation from a constitutional republic to corporation. Like I said, it doesn't matter who wins. Trump's a part of the same Rothschild elite that control it. Same with Harris. In my opinion, the only way that America is going to change is it needs a revolution. It needs a revolution or a true reset from its beginning. Like I said, I think it's either going to have an economic collapse or a civil war is going to happen. But speaking of that, I wanted you to also talk about the quote that you said on Twitter, the one like you were mentioning before, the 1920s, how the British Empire collapsed, that tweet.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you're thinking that it's like the old, well, it's a famous quote about the old world is dying and the new world is struggling to be born. Now is the time for monsters, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I think everybody can seize it, right? I mean, if you open up any kind of media and see what's going on around the world, aren't you horrified?
Isn't that what? Horrified. It is. Yeah. It is really, really bad. See.
Yeah, and like unfortunately, this is just the start, so we understand it. The next 20, 30 years is going to be that kind of thing, right? So, and another quote that is very important to understand is that, and that's completely true, also been true like that. What do you say? That soft people create bad times create strong people, right? Strong people create good times, and good times create soft or kind of weak people, right? Well, the West right now is in a period of where we had weak people that are right now have created horrible times. And now the horrible times will be here until there is a new generation of strong-hardened people that are used to live under horrible times and will be dead certain to build the future for their children so they don't have to experience those horrible times. That was the same thing. I mean, what was the generation that built the prosperity in USA? Well, that was the generation that experienced the horrors of the US depressions, right? I mean, you couldn't put them down because they have experienced the worst of it already. What's the generation right now that is right now getting and kind of getting into their prime in Russia? Well, that's a generation that was raised during the 90s in Russia. It was the worst period ever, right? From the point of kind of economical collapse and the social misery, right? And the horribles of the society in general. Well, those people say, well, never again. We don't want to do that. So that's why we say, unfortunately, well, there's going to be a longer period of things that one would not expect to see. And there's two kind of cycles that are merging together. One is that this cycle of kind of weak versus horrible times, right? Weak people, horrible times. But that's just kind of an 80, I would say, year cycle, right? But there's another bigger cycle, which is the, I would say, right now 500-year cycle of the, I would say, leadership shifting from the West to the Eurasia, and I would say leadership shifting from the maritime powers back to the land powers. One thing, one have to really kind of look carefully at the Yemen and what they do, right? So we have this very small country, kind of very small, insignificant from a GDP perspective, right? That is blocking right now 15% of the world trade. So you're sitting in Europe and you think that your inflation is going up. Well, that's because Yemen is blocking the Straits of Tears, right? And the shipping have to go around all the way around Africa. Higher cost of goods, right? More spend on fuel. And yeah, your prices in Europe are going up. And the Yemen is making a statement due to horrible things that's going on in Palestine, right? And there's nothing anybody can do about it, right?
Yes.
So
Correct.
before a time, there was like, well, the maritime powers such as US would be doing anything about it. Now, well, there's a risk that might be, well, what will happen if the US carrier sinks, right? And yeah, and it's like, well, there if you have a land power that is so insignificant that can block so much of the world trade, well, I would say the maritime power period is over. It's done. We are shifting from 500 years of maritime dominance started by the Dutch and the British back to the kind of times of the land powers, and this is why the Silk Road is gaining, or Belt and Road, Silk Road is getting reignited. And well, then it's a period of dominance for the largest continent in the world, which is the Eurasia, and of course connected to Africa. This is where most of the population live. This is where most of the growth will be, and this is where you want to be.
Yeah, that is true. Before we finish up, sorry, what was your name again? I keep forgetting your name. Sorry
That's
about
fine. It's llja Belobragin.
Llja, before we finish up, what would you like to say? What is your last thing you would like to say to the audience?
I think I would very much encourage to be inquisitive and to kind of make up your own mind, right? And the best thing usually to do is, well, if you are not sure about it, just come and check it out yourself, right? So especially if you think and hear different things about Russia, right? And there's lots of reporting that it could be biased. well, just get a tourist visa or any kind of visa, come to Russia, check it out yourself and see. Because, well, Tucker Carlson did it, right? There's lots of people that actually do it. So think independently, and then you can either confirm the things that you're reading, or you can actually have a different point of view. So, well, be independent and make up your own mind and trust your own eyes and visit. That's it. And if you like it, do understand that now is really the opportunity of a lifetime to move to Russia, because we anticipate that, well, if you move now, you're going to be in a much better situation, especially if you have some assets in the West that could be converted to assets in the Eurasia at a good level right now. But if, for example, what Welsh you are saying is going to come to pass, which we hope not, but if it will, well, your assets is not going to be worth a lot if there is kind of a general more economic collapse that will come in the West in the next 5 or 10 years. So you might want to kind of hedge your bets, at least kind of, don't keep all your eggs in the same basket. And last but not least, especially you have a family and you have kids, well, just think about if your school is going to teach your kids the right things or not, right? And lots of actually people that move to the West is due to the fact that they don't agree with stuff that their kids have been taught in German school, in some US schools like liberal states, right? And I think there is a certain hubris to believe that we can change the nature of who we are as humans, right? There is a desire for people, especially I think in the West, in the liberal thinking, to become gods, to become supermans. Well, I think the way we become better is by actually helping, serving, improving the world. That's how we become better, right? Not but enhancing or changing ourselves, right? But accepting who we are and improving the world around us. That's the way to that's the way for the future. And of course, passing over the best we can do to our children and to our societies, right? So if you are aligned with those values, I think you should definitely come to Russia and check it out.
Sounds good. Before we finish up, where can people find you, Elijah? Where can people find you?
Well, we have our website, right, which is kind of with all the information, which is movetorussia.com. It's very easy to remember, right? movetorussia.com. And also we have an X account that we are managing as a company and posting different, both news from within Russia and some updates on the different changes within the migration legislation, but also some general news and analysis that we like to spot around the world, right? So those are the things. And of course, come to Russia. We are in Moscow, and we are present and work across all the regions in Russia.
Well, it was an absolute pleasure to have you, llja. It was a pleasure to have you. I hope everything goes well with your, website. Absolutely fantastic. Just want to say to everybody, please follow. What's your name again? Sorry, I keep forgetting. So sorry about that.
Well, we have an X handle. It is movetorussia.com on X.
No, what's your name again? Sorry, your first name. I keep forgetting. Sorry about that. Really apologize.
That's fine, Welsh. It's llja.
llja. So everybody, please go check out llja's work. Go check out the Move to Russia website and Twitter. It's a fantastic website. If any of you guys are looking to move to Russia to escape from the West and move over there for whether the West does go to shit or anything, it's definitely a recommend to check his channel. He can definitely help you with that. So yeah, everybody give him the support he deserves. Give him all the credit. Go follow him. Go follow his website. And also, just to let you guys know, this website will be uploaded onto YouTube, and also this interview is going to be uploaded to Twitter. I'm going to be uploading more interviews upload interviews onto Twitter now too. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 159. Have a pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on as a guest, mate. It was a pleasure to have you. It was awesome.
Welsh, thank you so much for inviting us. It was a pleasure to participate. And it's always interesting to discuss those topics, right? It's an unprecedented time we live in.
Yeah, it was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for everybody for joining the Welsh Republic Podcast, episode 159. Take care, everybody. God bless you all. Stay safe and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.